The sonar screens flicker like a heartbeat gone wrong. Beneath Florida's turquoise shallows, vast craters gape open, entire sections of the seafloor collapsing into darkness. Methane plumes drift upward like ghostly smoke, crumble into dust, and the continental shelf itself is slipping inch by inch toward the abyss. Scientists call it a geological event, but the real cause isn't nature losing her temper. It's the price tag on America's grand experiments. For decades, Washington and Tallahassee sold Florida as the model of man-made paradise. Rerouted rivers, artificial beaches, pumped aquifers, phosphate mountains built on dissolving limestone. Every one of those fixes looked like progress until the ground began to break beneath them. Now Florida's foundation is literally tearing apart, a slow-motion collapse that money can no longer hide. What if the ocean floor beneath your own coast began to crack open? What if this was just the first warning shot? This is the Downturn Report, where the truth gets personal. And tonight we uncover how the ocean floor beneath Florida just gave way and why the United States is finally paying the price for its own crazy plans. Ocean's hidden trapdoors. If the sea could scream, Florida would be deaf by now. One morning, fishermen off Sarasota saw something that made their stomachs drop faster than their nets, a perfect, swirling eye of cobalt water, opening where there should have been solid seafloor. Scientists call them blue holes. Locals call them bad omens. NOAA's ocean exploration team, however, calls them a mystery with teeth. They've found dozens, maybe hundreds of these underwater sinkholes dotting the Gulf continental shelf, each one like a landmine buried in limestone, waiting for a little more pressure before it caves in. It's like Florida's ocean floor has termites, and the walls are beginning to give way. Take the Amberjack hole discovered in 2019, 30 miles off Sarasota, an abyss so deep, around 350 feet, it swallows light whole. NOAA divers once described it as an oasis, but anyone who's ever seen it knows that word is a cruel joke. Its bottom is a graveyard bones of dead marine life. No oxygen, no sunlight, just the quiet sound of decay. Then there's the Green Banana Hole, a name that sounds like a smoothie shop special but hides a void nearly 430 feet deep, with its rim sitting 150 feet below the waves. Scientists say it formed when sea levels were lower when that land was dry before the ocean reclaimed it like an overdue debt collector. Now the rising pressure of groundwater and shifting sediment layers are reopening those ancient wounds. The U.S. Geological Survey's seismic reflection profiles reveal a horror movie written in limestone. Beneath the Gulf, they've found collapse features, cavities, dissolving faster than sugar cubes in hot coffee. In one case, the red snapper. Sink near Crescent Beach has already torn through the seabed, exposing layers that should have stayed buried for millennia. Every time one hole gives out, the pressure doesn't vanish, it travels sideways, squeezing the neighboring strata like dominoes nudging each other toward failure. One collapse whispers to the next, and the ocean floor, patient for centuries, is starting to murmur back. The question that keeps geologists awake isn't if another hole will open, it's where. Florida's fragile foundation. From above, Florida's continental shelf looks deceptively calm, a smooth green carpet stretching into the Gulf before it plunges like a cliff at sea. But beneath that tranquil map lies one of the most unstable geological foundations in the continental United States. On NOAA and USGS bathymetry charts, the West Florida shelf sprawls outward nearly 120 to 180 kilometers from the coast, before hitting its shelf break. A sudden drop around 60 to 75 meters deep. It's like a swimming pool with a cracked bottom wide and shallow, until it suddenly gives way. The trouble starts with what this shelf is made of. Instead of solid rock, it's a thin crust of sand and mud resting on ancient karst limestone, a Swiss cheese of caves and tunnels formed by centuries of dissolving carbonate. Geological drilling by the Florida Intercontinental Shelf Program and Bureau of Ocean Energy Management confirms that much of this seabed is little more than a veneer, a few meters of sediment, hiding a honeycomb of voids below. When the sediment thins, that fragile limestone takes the hit, and water pressure begins to chew away its edges. Seismic profiles from the USGS Speckler and Red Snapper, studies off Florida's northeast coast, show collapse features lurking just tens of meters beneath the seafloor, meaning the limestone ceiling beneath that thin sediment cover is already sagging. Once erosion strips away that protective layer, the seafloor is exposed like skin without muscle, vulnerable to every shift in current or surge in groundwater. And when one weak patch gives way, the pressure doesn't stop there, it travels like a ripple racing across wet sand, setting the stage for the next collapse. Methane's silent uprising. Imagine the ocean floor exhaling not bubbles of air, but methane, seeping silently through cracks like whispers from below. These methane seeps, or vents, are the ocean's pressure valves where buried gas escapes through weakened sediment. When the sediment cap fractures, methane stored in hydrates or trapped chambers surges upward through what geologists call chimneys, vertical columns of gas that pierce the seafloor like ghostly flares. According to Geoscience World's study, evidence for extensive methane venting on the continental slope. These sudden methane releases can trigger slope failures by breaking the bonds that hold seafloor sediment together, turning firm ground into sinking sand. In Florida's warm coastal waters, the risk grows sharper. Methane hydrates stable in colder, high-pressure depths become volatile here. A drop in subsurface pressure, whether from groundwater withdrawal, drilling, or shifting currents, can melt those hydrates, releasing trapped gas that punches upward and forces the sediment to swell and crack. NOAA and USGS surveys across U.S. margins have already detected numerous methane seeps, proof that such gas leaks are far more common than anyone once believed. Each methane vent acts like a vein of pressure. As gas rises, it fractures the overlying layers, spreading cracks outward and downward toward the limestone base. The seafloor isn't still, it's breathing, shifting, restless beneath its calm disguise. When that fragile balance tips, from above or within, the chain reaction can turn quiet, seeps into violent collapses. So now you've seen it, the blue holes yawning open like the ocean's pupils, the fragile limestone shelf stretching thin under invisible strain, and the methane gas whispering up through secret cracks. Florida's seafloor isn't just shifting, it's warning us, in the only language the Earth knows, collapse. The sonar maps, the seismic scars, the venting plumes all point to one truth. This isn't random. Something has been pushing the ground to its breaking point, and it's not just nature losing her temper. The real trigger lies above in the plans we drew, the pumps we built, and the illusions we sold to ourselves. Decades of water diversion, underground extraction, and sand restoration have rewired Florida's foundation, like a surgeon cutting nerves without knowing which muscle will twitch. Each fix we celebrated may have quietly undone the balance beneath our feet. If the ocean floor can suddenly open 30 miles offshore, what's stopping it from happening closer, say, beneath your beach, your bay, your home? The question isn't whether Florida's foundation will give way, it's how far the damage has already spread. Because what you've just seen isn't the full story. It's only the first tremor before the ground starts to fall. Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, SERP. When Congress approved the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan in the year 2000 under the Water Resources Development Act, it was called the largest ecosystem restoration project in history. Its mission sounded poetic: to restore, protect, and preserve South Florida's water system by managing the quality, quantity, timing, and distribution of water. The budget was $8.2 billion, spread across 3 decades, but like every grand promise carved in marble, it grew bloated: more money, more time, more unintended consequences. SERP's strategy was monumental: create reservoirs, canals, and stormwater treatment areas, reopen natural flow paths, and control floods by manipulating water levels across the state. The idea was to rewild the Everglades to undo a century of drainage and mismanagement. But in hydrological terms, every valve, every gate, every redirected canal is a pressure weapon. When you move water, you move weight, and weight changes the stress on the crust. Florida's aquifer is no granite vault. It's a fragile sponge of karst limestone, full of dissolved voids and hidden chambers. The Floridan aquifer, the state's great underground water bank, responds to even subtle shifts like a lung-to-air pressure, and SERP's tinkering has been anything but subtle. USGS Circular 1182 revealed that large portions of the Everglades have already sunk due to oxidation of drained peat soils. In once wet marshlands, the moment engineers pulled the plug to restore flow, the exposed peat began drying and collapsing. Researchers from the Everglades Research Center even set concrete markers into the ground decades ago, and now, those same posts stand more than 6 feet higher than the shrinking soil around them. That's not restoration, that's erosion in disguise. And here's the geological twist. When the land surface subsides, pressure distribution shifts downward into the karst beneath. It's like rearranging the weight on a cracked table. Stress migrates to the weak spots. Beneath South Florida, those weak spots link directly to the shelf limestone extending toward the Gulf and Atlantic margins. The loss of equilibrium inland can reverberate outward, straining the same strata now showing sinkholes and methane vents offshore. In short, the Everglades rebirth may have loosened the bolts of Florida's continental shelf. 2 decades in, the dream still limps forward. The 2020 report to Congress admitted that progress was slow and fragmented, with many sub-projects not even begun. Environmental scorecards graded the ecosystem's health phosphorus levels, peat elevation, species diversity between C and D, meaning degraded. Billions spent, and yet the ground literally sagged beneath it. On paper, SERP promised to calm the waters. In practice, it rearranged the plumbing of an entire state, altering groundwater gradients, draining and refilling basins, forcing natural systems to play musical chairs with gravity. The result? A a subtle but relentless redistribution of subsurface stress. What politicians sold as restoration was, in truth, a continental-scale hydrological experiment. And as Florida's seafloor starts to sink, the question isn't whether SERP worked, it's whether it worked too well. If the plan that promised to restore nature ends with the Earth literally collapsing, can we still call it restoration? Or is this what happens when humanity edits a blueprint it never wrote? Draining the Earth's veins. Florida has been drinking its own lifeblood for decades, siphoning water straight from the veins of the planet. Beneath its beaches and theme parks lies the Floridan Aquifer, one of the most productive groundwater systems on Earth, feeding more than 10 million people and sustaining farms, factories, and golf courses. But as the state's thirst grew, so did the damage. USGS reports show that in areas like Tampa Bay and Polk County, groundwater levels have dropped by as much as 60 feet, nearly 18 meters below their historical highs. Picture that, an underground lake drained so far down it's like pulling the cork from a continent. And when that invisible support vanishes, the land above begins to fold in on itself. Florida's geology is a delicate skeleton of karst limestone, porous, hollow, and kept stable only by the pressure of the water within it. Remove that water, and the balance collapses like a lung without air. The 2016 sinkhole at Mosaic's phosphate facility in Mulberry, Polk County was a chilling example. A hole 45 feet wide opened beneath a massive gypsum stack, swallowing an estimated 215 million gallons over 800 million liters of polluted water straight into the Floridan aquifer. State officials confirmed the breach, forcing Mosaic to face investigations and compensation orders. Even as of 2023, the company was still monitoring the site's liners for new tiers, haunted by the possibility that another sinkhole could open at any moment. The physics are merciless. When groundwater is pumped out, pore pressure drops. Without that internal hydraulic lift, limestone voids lose their buoyancy and cave in. Each collapse reverberates outward through the subsurface from the fields of Polk County to the continental shelf off Tampa Bay. What begins as an inland sinkhole can echo beneath the sea, spreading stress through the same karst layers that hold up Florida's coast. The connection between dry lawns and seafloor cracks isn't poetic, it's geological cause and effect. And the bill is coming due. Homeowners across the state now face cracked foundations, tilted floors, and denied insurance claims, since many policies exclude sinkhole damage unless the house physically collapses. Local governments have installed pressure monitoring wells and groundwater recovery pumps, spending millions to keep the ground from swallowing their cities. When you drain water from a sponge, don't be surprised when it shrinks. Florida has been doing that for half a century, and now the sponge isn't just drying, it's tearing. The aquifer once held the state up. Now, like a mattress losing its springs, it's sagging, and everything built on top, from highways to coral reefs, is slowly sinking with it, patching the shore, breaking the floor. If Florida's coastline were a movie star, it's been getting sand facelifts for nearly a century, but each one leaves a deeper scar beneath the makeup. Since the early 1900s, the state has spent at least $1.9 billion pumping, dumping, and bulldozing sand back onto its eroding beaches. The Environmental Defense Fund calls it the endless treadmill of sand. The idea sounds innocent enough. Borrow sand from offshore pits or distant seabeds, pump it through pipes, and pile it onshore to rebuild beaches that storms have stolen. But that quick fix has quietly rewritten the physics beneath Florida's coast. Take Miami Beach's 2022-2023 renourishment, around 835,000 cubic yards of sand over 638,000 cubic meters were dredged and laid across nearly 11,400 feet of shoreline. Smaller towns joined in. Hillsborough Beach in 2025 trucked in 64,000 cubic yards to patch its collapsing coast. Each project looks triumphant in drone footage. Golden sand, umbrellas, tourists cheering. But zoom out a few years, and it's a deja vu montage, the waves reclaiming the sand, the budget's doubling, and the same engineers returning with new contracts. Florida's beaches have become the state's most expensive illusion, built to erode, maintained by denial. Beneath the postcard surface lies a far uglier equation. Those offshore borrow pits, the underwater quarries where sand is mined, strip away the natural cushion between sediment and the limestone foundation below. Remove that layer, and you weaken the bed that helps distribute stress. Then when millions of cubic yards of heavy, water-saturated sand are dumped back near shore, it changes everything. The wave patterns, nearshore current velocity, and local gravity loads. The new sand is loose, uncemented, easily churned up by storms. Every renourishment resets the pressure balance, shaking, compacting, or even cracking the seabed in the process. Think of it as patching a leaky roof by piling more bricks on top. The maintenance cycle has become absurd. Most beach projects must be repeated every 2 to 5 years, each one eroding faster than the last. Hurricanes wipe out multi-million-dollar projects in a single night. Offshore borrow zones, meanwhile, are growing deeper, destabilizing slopes and altering the natural contour of the continental shelf. Coral reefs and seagrass beds pay the quietest price, smothered by silt and starved of sunlight. So ask yourself this: if the ground beneath Florida's beaches is being hollowed out offshore and overloaded onshore, how long before the seesaw tips? When the next wave of undersea pressure builds, those borrow pits might not just supply sand, they could become the very cracks through which the ocean floor gives way. Florida isn't just rebuilding its beaches, it's stacking weight on a ticking fault line made of sand. The insurance illusion. In theory, Florida promised its citizens a safety net. In 2007, lawmakers proudly amended Florida Statute Part 627.706, mandating that every homeowner's insurance policy must include coverage for catastrophic ground cover collapse. It sounded reassuring, a kind of invisible shield against Florida's notorious sinkholes. The fine print laid out 4 conditions. The collapse must occur suddenly, create a visible depression, cause structural damage to the building's foundation, and be officially declared dangerous by a local authority. On paper, that's protection. In reality, it's a mirage, a parachute that only opens once you've already hit the ground. The law was sold to the public as a guardian angel. If the earth beneath your home opened, you wouldn't face ruin alone. But across Florida, residents discovered that the promise evaporates as quickly as the groundwater beneath them. Reports from the Florida Office of Insurance Regulation and investigative journalists reveal that most claims are denied. Why? Because most collapses aren't catastrophic enough. Cracked walls, tilted floors, sinking driveways, they don't count. Unless your house literally caves in, insurers shrug and close the file. Families in places like Hernando, Pasco, and Polk counties have been forced to spend tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket, watching the land shift under their feet while their policies collect dust. It's a bitter irony. The same state that built its prosperity atop fragile limestone now insists that only a visible chasm qualifies for relief. Meanwhile, minor subsidence, the quiet sagging that precedes disaster, goes unpaid, unrecorded, and untreated. Multiply that by thousands of homes, and you get a map of invisible debt, ordinary citizens subsidizing geological collapse. Now imagine what happens if the seafloor sinkholes and nearshore collapses described earlier begin to spread inland. The scale would dwarf every clause of the insurance code. No actuarial table could absorb a crisis that stretches from the Everglades to Tampa Bay. When the ground itself becomes uninsurable, the cost shifts from corporations to citizens, from policy to public funds. So what was billed as protection is really a paper shield, one that curls at the edges when heat rises. Florida once promised, if the ground gives way, we'll catch you. But when it finally did, the only thing that collapsed faster than the earth was the promise itself. Lawful sand, unlawful consequences. Only in Florida could moving sand become a matter for the Supreme Court. The Beach and Shore Preservation Act, first passed in 1961 and amended repeatedly since, gave the state sweeping power to rebuild its disappearing beaches, often using public funds. Under this law, counties and municipalities could dredge sand from offshore sites, dump it on eroded coastlines, and declare the new expanded beach public land. It was bureaucratic alchemy, turn erosion into property law, when angry beachfront owners sued, arguing that the state was seizing private shoreline under the guise of restoration. The case Stop the Beach Renourishment, Inc. Florida Department of Environmental Protection rose all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2010, the justices ruled in favor of the state. The renourishment program, they said, didn't unreasonably take private property. It was a victory for coastal engineering and a quiet disaster for accountability. That ruling gave Florida what amounted to a legal blank check. With the law's backing, agencies could dig, dredge, and reshape the coast with little fear of lawsuits. Public beaches grew wider on paper, and contractors kept busy. But below the surface, the state's right to renourish became a slow-motion geological liability. Every dump of sand changed the nearshore dynamics, altering wave angles, redirecting currents, and loading millions of new tons of weight onto a crust already cracking from groundwater loss. The borrowed sand didn't blend. It layered, heavier and looser, pressing down on sediment that was never meant to bear it. Offshore borrow zones, the pits carved into the seabed to feed this legal enterprise, became craters of instability. Once stripped of their cushioning sediment, these zones transmitted stress like veins of weakness through the seafloor. As the seafloor thins, these borrow zones could act like dominoes in a chain reaction. One collapses, redistributing pressure that triggers the next. It's a quiet feedback loop. The same law meant to protect the coast is now silently undercutting it. And the financial cost mirrors the geological one. Each replenishment project lasts only a few years before erosion returns. Local governments, addicted to federal and state subsidies, find themselves in a cycle of debt. Sand, washout, repeat. Meanwhile, the infrastructure built atop this fragile edge, roads, hotels, seawalls, sits on a foundation as transient as the law that authorized it. The Beach and Shore Preservation Act gave Florida the authority to rebuild its coast, but not the capacity to bear the consequences beneath it. Florida legalized the act of reshaping its shoreline, but when the ocean floor collapses, there's no statute left to sue gravity. Mountains of waste. Foundations of air. Florida built its fortune on fertilizer and its ticking time bomb on limestone. For more than a century, the state's phosphate industry has mined the bones of ancient seabeds to feed the world's farms. But the dirty secret behind that global supply is what's left behind: phosphogypsum, a radioactive, acidic byproduct stacked into towering gypsum mountains that sit like chemical volcanoes atop Florida's karst landscape. According to AP News, the state now holds more than 1 billion tons of phosphogypsum stored in dozens of stacks across its center. Imagine hills of toxic dust, some as tall as 30-story buildings perched on limestone so porous it might as well be Swiss cheese. What could possibly go wrong? In 2016, at Mosaic's New Wales facility in Polk County, the ground answered. A sinkhole 45 feet wide opened beneath a gypsum stack, swallowing roughly 215 million gallons, about 814 million liters of wastewater, laced with heavy metals, radium, and acidic residue. The toxic slurry plunged straight into the Floridan aquifer, the same underground reservoir that supplies drinking water to millions. It was a disaster too large to cover up. The Florida Department of Environmental Protection, the EPA, and environmental groups like Earth Justice launched investigations, forcing Mosaic to sign a consent order and monitor the contamination. Years later, the company still inspects the liners beneath its stacks, terrified of the next hole opening underfoot. The science behind the catastrophe is simple but unforgiving. Each gypsum stack weighs millions of tons, pressing down on limestone riddled with hidden cavities. That rock as soluble water dissolves it over time, creating voids like invisible mine shafts. Add to that the acidic seepage from waste ponds, which accelerates the chemical erosion of the rock, and you've built a mountain balanced on a sponge. When one cavity collapses, the load shifts unevenly, cracking through adjacent layers. Pressure ripples outward through the aquifer, deforming strata that connect far beyond the mine's fence line, even toward the coastal shelf already trembling under its own burden. The fallout didn't stop with groundwater pollution. Phosphogypsum is rich in radium, a radioactive element that decays into radon gas, meaning even dry stacks emit low-level radiation into nearby communities. Contamination monitoring costs run into the millions annually, and yet these stacks remain, expanding as new waste piles atop old. Every ton of phosphate fertilizer produced adds 5 tons of phosphogypsum to the growing mountain range of poison. They built mountains of waste on rock that dissolves in water and then acted shocked when the ground drank it. This isn't just industrial negligence, it's geological arrogance. Florida's phosphate legacy is the perfect metaphor for America's crazy plans, short-term gain, stacked high on long-term collapse. Florida's ocean floor isn't done speaking, it's only catching its breath between shocks. Scientists from NOAA, USGS, and the Florida Geological Survey are now tracking thousands of microfractures, methane seeps, and sudden gas plumes along the Gulf Shelf, warning that pressure changes could trigger undersea landslides capable of sending local tsunamis racing toward shore. Billions are already being poured annually into mitigation, sealing sinkholes, reinforcing canals, rebalancing groundwater, and shoring up beaches that keep collapsing anyway, a kind of interest payment on America's geological debt. Every ton of sand dumped, every gallon pumped, every regulation delayed tightens the feedback loop between land and sea. Citizens are now urged to map their groundwater zones, monitor coastal cracks, and prepare for saltwater intrusion that could swallow whole neighborhoods within a decade. The planet's balance sheet is calling in its dues, and Florida may be the first payment. From redirected rivers to collapsing gypsum mountains. This isn't erosion, it's repayment for our own engineering hubris. From redirecting rivers to stacking poison on porous stone, the US tried to engineer paradise and engineered its collapse. Does your county depend on these same fixes? Have you seen the ground change? This is the Downturn Report, where the truth gets personal.
Thank you for watching today's video all the way through. If you found the content helpful, don't forget to click like and subscribe to stay updated with our latest daily videos. Now, feel free to check out other feature videos currently showing on your screen. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.